Hi guys, this is Foundations and Analysis of Literary Works content for week 3, and there are going to be 2 parts. The first part, I'm going to talk about the characteristics of short story, including the definition, and the second part, we'll look at the analysis of the actual stories, the 2 stories in the book. There are The Gift of the Magi and Fish Chic by Amy Tan. Okay, so make sure before we get to that part, the analysis part, make sure you read those 2 stories first. I'm going to ask for your opinion in the class. Okay, I'm going to need your participation, so make sure you read the 2 stories. Okay, and you could understand what I'm talking about in the session. Now let's begin with what is short story. Short story is a prose narrative with a fully developed theme, usually dealing with a few characters and a single setting. Okay, with this definition, we can look at how it's described. Okay, it's a prose, so it's not a poem. There's no specific rhythm or pattern in how these stories are written. Okay, and it's a narrative, so it wants to tell a story. But the thing that made this distinct to compared to the parable or folktale and fairy tale, because it's a fully developed theme. See, with with parable, fairy tale, folktale, fable, you've got one person journey to something, met a villain, fight with the villain, the end. But with a fully developed theme, sometimes you get some depth to it. The theme will be clearer. And you will see there might be main themes and sub themes also, so they're more complex. Short story is generally more complex, okay, than parable or fairy tales, and usually dealing with a few characters and a single setting. This point is actually quite similar to fable and fairy tale. That it's quite a simple narrative. Not like a novel. With a novel, you have lots of characters sometimes, and sometimes you have more than one settings. It could be set in New York, in other cities, more than one could be. But with short story, the scope is still simple and limited. And actually, what we call short story nowadays, it's quite a new genre. I mean, compared to the olden times where when poetry is more popular, actually. See, because it's quite new, but new in what I mean is the 19th century. So from 18 something to 1899 per se. And the subject matter of short story are of course different from the fables and fairy tales. It's more real in a sense. Okay, when you read short story, maybe you feel more related to that, because short story normally represents realities in daily life. So you can find A, B, Jim, Sarah, and when you read their stories, they reflect on you. Maybe you feel more related to that than when you read Cinderella. Oh, no one in real life would be like Cinderella, right? And maybe if you don't believe in fairy godmother, then that's almost like a fantasy world versus the reality, today's world. Okay? And sometimes, most often times, because it wants to touch people's lives, most people are in middle class. That's why it represents realities, but normally those of the middle class. And when we talk about short story or any narrative at all, there are usually these key elements that you should know about. Okay, there needs to be plot, characters, and setting. Okay, and with plot, actually, it's the answer to what happened in the story. So when your friend recommend you, oh, have you seen have you seen Startup in Netflix? And then you said, no, I haven't. Can you tell me what's it about? And normally that description is about what happened in the story. Oh, well, actually, this girl met this guy and they when you talked about the actions, well, that's you are describing the plot. And normally, like they said, like a unified theme or like a simple story, you have only one arc. This here, imagine it like a bridge, okay? This is a storyline. And normally, this is what you call like the structure of plot in most stories, okay? There needs to be like an opening situation first. Normally, the first line of the story is like the fables we read. We knew that, like last week, that, okay, this is a story about a local tribe of Indians, the Cinderella one. It happens like near the Atlantic Ocean. For example, it happens in the olden time where gods still come and help people. People still interact with gods, for example. So that's like, normally the opening situation will start very early in the first sentence. Then when that protagonist go through the journey or go through some hardship, meet people, do things, that's like the rising action. If you notice in movies, sometimes the first 10 minutes are just about telling you who this character is, right? But the action really comes like later near the climax. See? At first you might seem like, oh, it's quite slow pace, it's boring. But then later, this character will face like bang, 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 bang. Like think of like in Marvel characters when they investigate things that happen, they don't know yet who did the action, right? But then when they knew the villains, now they have to fight the bad guys. They have to save the world. See, that's why we call it a rising action. Through conflict. There needs to be conflict, okay? And the action keeps repeating more and more and more until it reaches the climax, until the final showdown. See, maybe the villain fights, the protagonist has to fight the villain. And then when the protagonist wins, then it's the falling action until the resolution, which means, okay, maybe you get the scene of how the villains are kept in the prison, how the protagonist has been awarded maybe some kind of medals, like, oh, everyone praise the superheroes, okay? So that's already the falling action. Because why we call it falling? Because the conflict has been eliminated. So this is kind of like wrapping up things you want to talk about until the end, until you see that black screen that says the end. And that's like the resolution, the when there's nothing else to explore, then that's the end. That's normally like the plot line that most stories follow, okay? Now, with character, this element actually answered who is or okay, who are in the story. So you talk about person now, but the person here, in short story, you can even have like one character, okay? But normally there needs to be conflict, like I said, right, in the plot. But that conflict could be with a person. If it's between two persons, then you have the protagonist and the antagonist, okay? But with these words, I already told you about this. Characteristics, okay? When you see this, either in the quiz in the exam or when you read something, okay? Characteristics means นิสัยของ character, okay? So when you hear the word character, character เป็นยังไงcharacter ตัวนี้มันดีมากเลย when you hear people say like that, it means they're talking about a person, right? But when you want to describe the quality of the character, how those actions like, represent the character, you call those qualities, okay? Those actions that you have to interpret, characteristics, okay? So you can say that the characteristics of the villain in what? Maybe Loki. Maybe Loki in Avengers. you can say like the characteristic of Loki is he's very cunning. So he's really brilliant, like he's smart, but in a bad way, in a way that manipulate other people for his own gain. For example, so he's witty, he's a coward a bit, so he doesn't like to fight directly. He likes to trick people. See, so these descriptions are the characteristic. Okay, that's how you describe the character, and the ways that you can describe these words, characteristics, there are also two types of characteristics. Like this is in broad terms. You can say that character is flat or that character is round. When you say flat, then round, glum, it doesn't mean that those characters are like has been stomped by someone, or that character is very fat, round in that way. These are used to describe the dimensions of the character. So sometimes when we like to tease our friend, or like mock the Thai soap opera, Lakon Nam Nao, okay? We like to say that, oh, actually, like anyone who plays like Giksuvatini characters, they're normally villains, right? And these villains have stereotypes. The way most female villains in Thai soap opera are that they usually wear red lipstick, very bright red lipstick, and then they dress like very sexily to seduce the male protagonist, for example. So you can say that, oh, every time you see this character, you always see them as like maybe always screaming at another person, like like very like spoiled, very like angry, very jealous. So you can call that the portrayal of the characters in Thai soap opera is normally flat, which means undifferentiated. So different, แตกต่าง, right? Differentiate is a verb, okay? To make this different from something is to differentiate. When you put un, so not, right? Not different. So it means in all the scenes these characters appear to be in, always the same angle, always angry, always like jealous, right? So there's no differences at all in these characters in between scenes. No development, no growth. See, so it's only one dimensional. Maybe those villains have like kind heart, but you don't get to see that on the film because the script, like purposely, like portray them as flat characters. But like nowadays, I think at least there might be some development to the characters in Thailand, Thai soap opera, for example. So if you say like, oh, this female protagonist, Nang Ek, right? This character is quite round actually. It means they are complex, okay, and well developed. Meaning that you don't, for example, the female protagonist, imagine Dao Prasuk in the olden times. Always good, like no matter anyone like slap her, she never fights back, right? But female protagonist these days, if the villain hit her in the right, she hits back. Actually, she slaps back. See, so you get to see like a more complex side that normally good people are good. Normally, good people are good, but when good people are provoked, like by slapping, they get to respond. Sometimes in an unexpected way. So that shows that they are complex in that character, see? And if you see like someone praise this movie, this Korean series, that, ooh, the characters are well developed. It means maybe at first they appeared flat. You got like Manut Pa. Maybe if you look at like Sweet Home, that's like, a monster movie, right? And these people are trapped in an apartment, and you've always got this Manut Pa who always complain, who doesn't actually contribute to the survival of the group. But actually, like in the end, she gets to save other people, like she gets to save the rest of the group. See, so it shows like growth. It shows that through these challenges, through these conflicts, this character has shown other sides and has improved to be better, maybe to be more kind-hearted, or to even be smarter at least. See, so that's well developed. Huh? Okay, and with characters, you can also see like how I describe that static and dynamic. So static means from the beginning to the end, always the same, remain essentially the same. Maybe you see like a son of a mafia. Okay, maybe you see this character that, oh, he's very spoiled, he always like bullied other people around him, and then when he met like the female protagonist, and her kindness and her goodness, like make him like, oh, maybe I would do something good for a change. But when he knows that she doesn't love him and she chooses the male protagonist, then he turns back to be evil again, see? So actually it means static, that character remain essentially the same in the core, okay? But with dynamic, see, you see the change in the course of the plot. So like Manut Pa that I described, maybe at first she seemed like always complaining and not doing anything, but later she became smarter, she became like more caring to others around her, for example. Dynamic. Round, you get to see like other dimensions, other aspects of that character. Flat, you only see one side, okay? Conclusion. But with changes, okay, what are the changes in the character? If that appear in the quiz, okay, what are the changes in the character? Well, you can say that there are no changes, meaning from beginning to the end. Think of the graph, okay, evil until the end. Nothing changes. But dynamic, good, bad. Oh, smarter, maybe. See, you see, these are called dynamics, okay. Now, with settings, in Thai, we normally translate this as chak, okay? But actually, chak is not just a background on stage, but it actually refers to both the time and the place of the story. So it answers the question of where and when does the story take place. Okay, so if I ask, okay, what is the setting of Jane Austen's novel Pride and Prejudice? Well, you can say, oh, the setting is in the Victorian era, maybe early Victorian era, in the Somerset area of England. See, so the way I described this, the setting, I talked about two things, right? The Victorian era is the time it takes place around like 18th century. Or late 18th century could be, and the beginning of the 19th century. And where I talked about like the Somerset area maybe, or it's like Oxfordshire, like a region in the UK at that time. See? Okay? These things, I can also say like with the Victorian setting, Pride and Prejudice really captures the middle class society and its inner conflicts, inner workings of the England. See, so when I describe setting, I can also include social statuses, weather, or even historical periods, like my example. Okay, but you can also consider atmosphere as part of setting. So when I say, okay, can you describe the setting of Sherlock Holmes? Besides talking about, in like late 19th century to the beginning of the 20th century, you can also say, it's also the mood and tone of the story. Okay, you can say like, the setting is like a grim, dark mystery involving like Victorian characters, something like that. So your description could include mood and tone of the story. So when you see mood and tone, think of the adjective that describe these things. Mood, so it could be exciting, could be suspenseful, could be ghostly, could be gothic. So with gothic, sometimes these are more like a specific terms. You might have to look this up. Okay, if you want to describe something gothic, think about the work of Edgar Allan Poe, okay? So they always, like all in his stories, he always choose like what you call similar settings, similar atmosphere. Maybe the characters are different, the plots are different, but with Gothic, because he shows the Gothic atmosphere, his stories mostly have elements of mystery and suspense. Okay, sometimes scary, sometimes not, but mostly mystery and suspense. Okay. Now, with narrative voice, this will be the new word you see too. When we talk about voice, the easiest way to understand this is when you hear your parents tell you stories, like bedtime stories. They always start with like, once upon a time there was a princess named Margaret, something like that. See, it's not like the actual voice that tells stories, but it's actually about viewpoints, okay? Or in this case, point of view, okay? So imagine that someone tells you this story. If your friend tells you the story, how would they use the pronoun? Of course, they will use I, right? So they say, oh, you know what? Last night I met Eric. Oh, he's so handsome. Like, I really wanted to go and talk to him, but I was too afraid. See, you got I. He was handsome. But you, the reader might not think, not handsome enough for me. Could be like that. See, so it's not just the voice that I or you, or you look beautiful. Like, you should read this because it's a nice story, and we are going to read it together, that kind of thing. Or could even be like God's point of view, if you know what I mean. It's the third person point of view. Could also be then Harry hops on his broomstick and prepare to like fight against the Dementors, yeah, for example. See, so whatever the pronoun used in the story is, there's always one thing that attached to that pronoun. Either I, you don't actually see that I, or like he, she. Okay, he, she. That's the perspective. And this perspective is the perspective of the narrator. Sometimes you can see the narrator, sometimes not. Sometimes you can say, like, you see in the James Durber version, like moral. That there's actually like a third person in that narrative. There's the narrator who gets to say these lines, and you know that they are not the wolf, that they're not the voices, they are not the Red Riding Hood or others in the character. It's from outside the stories. So you can sense that, oh, actually there's someone talking to you. Well, that's the narrator speaks to readers. And to be able to say what's the narrative voice used in this story is the process of identifying who is telling the story and whose eyes, okay, the readers see the action. You'll see types of it. Okay, you see more when I click next slide. Now, there are various types of narrative voice, okay? With the first one, normally when you read stories, it starts with I. This is my story. Dear diary, I am telling you a story. I want to tell you something, dear reader. For example, see, I, first person. So normally the narrator is a character in the story. So you get to hear what this character does, okay, in the story. One thing, two things, first thing, second thing, on and on, okay? But it's limited because you only get to see this person's personal thoughts and feelings, okay? And only what he or she sees and is told by other characters. So sometimes when you see like there's a misunderstanding between two characters, for example, Pride and Prejudice, okay? What do you call Elizabeth, the female protagonist, she only, what do you call it, interacts with Mr. Darcy for a brief moment, and she doesn't like him. That's her first impression, right? But then later, when another character told her that, oh, he's a bad guy, he did this, he did that, and then she believes him. And because the story in that section, if it's written in a way that, oh, I think Mr. Darcy is very arrogant, then it's hard for the reader to, not believe the narrator, right? So our judgment of another character might be blinded or biased by that description, okay? So you only know what that person tells you, okay? The character. Because, why? Because the first person point of view cannot tell us thoughts of other characters. You don't get to hear Mr. Darcy's thoughts, okay? So you don't know. You only get to analyze him through his actions only, okay? Actions or behaviors. For example, when you read this sentence, right? When I wake up, the other side of the bed is cold. So this tells a lot about the person, about the narrator. This narrator expects that on the bed, there must be another person there. Maybe he's married. Maybe he has a boyfriend or girlfriend. And when he said the other side of the bed is cold, it means that person normally sleeps with him or her, but then some unusual things happen that there's an empty space there when there shouldn't be. See, you see lots of information there, but only through his or her perspective. With second person point of view, the narrator will tell the story by using you, okay? So it's being told through the addressee's point of view here. It means you don't get to see this quite often, because if the perspective is second person, it means you get to read lots of instruction. You do this, you do that, you hear that, you know that. Like, you're going to feel annoyed, right? Why does the narrator keeps pointing at me? I want to read about the story. So that also can disrupt the reader's involvement with the story. So there must be a caution here. That's why most writers don't use that, okay? And it is the least commonly used POV. POV here is point of view, okay, in fiction. But the example I put here, if you really want to see like the examples, I recommend reading If on a Winter's Night a Traveler. Okay, that's a title by Mr. Cavello, okay? So these are the kind of like examples. You are about to begin reading Italo Calvino's new novel, If on a Winter's Night a Traveler. Relax, concentrate. These are actually the opening sentence, okay, in the novel. And he keeps on and on using you, see? So you get to see you as a start, and also, like I said, right? Order ประโยคคำสั่ง right? Relax, concentrate. He's telling you what to do. This, with third person point of view, these are the most common ones that you might feel more familiar with, because in fables, in parables, you say, the fox does this, then the ant answer that. You are like you get to see the stories from the outsider's perspective. See, it's an outsider who can report what he or she can hear. And this narrator tell us what is happening, okay? The fox did this, the ant did that, but he cannot tell us the thoughts of the characters. This is called like limited third person, okay? If you want to know like the specific terms, limited. Why limited? Harry does this, Harry does that. The boy says this, then the girl says. See, you only see the surface of things. But if you want to, but you can really find like novels or stories that can, penetrate the character's thought. That's why in Harry Potter, you get to see what Harry's thinking too. Harry doesn't like Malfoy. Harry thinks Snape doesn't like him very much. Harry thinks Snape doesn't like him very much. You actually get to hear Harry's opinion. But if it's at the surface level, the writer will use like Harry joins the defense against the dark arts class, so you only see his actions. So sometimes there's a mix of these two, both limited third person and God's point of view. They call it omniscient, means the one who knows all. Omniscient point of view. Okay. See, with limited, you got an outsider. His and her ability to see into the mind characters are limited, sometimes only one. And if you read Harry Potter is the main character. So if you read like the first book, I think, the first or second book, no more than that. Maybe it's just only in the beginning. First or second book, you see that it's Harry does this, Harry does that. You are only stick with Harry. That's why you don't know what happens behind the scene. Harry saw Professor Snape enter Albus Dumbledore's room. But you don't get to know what they were talking about, right? These two characters, because Harry couldn't see that. Harry wasn't in the room. See? Because it's from a single character's point of view. But with omniscient, I said omniscient, not omniscient, look, not omniscient, no. Omniscient, the narrator is an all-knowing outsider. So you can think about you are an ego, okay? If you want to write a story and you want to be able to zoom in and out of that character's mind. That's why in certain section you can see, oh, Harry thinks, see, and can enter the minds of more than one of the characters. He can, maybe that voice can even like describe what you call Malfoy never thought that he could hate anyone more than Harry Potter. If you see this line, it means it's an omniscient point of view, okay? You are not only stuck with Harry, you get to hear Malfoy's thought too, see? Can, like I said, more than one characters, or can firmly impose his or her presence between readers and the story and keeps complete control over the narrative. See, when you read morals, if it's just what you call fables, for example, okay, the ant and the grasshopper, actually the story ends with, oh, and the grasshopper dies. That's it at the end. But because what you call the author wants to teach student, that's why like there's this extra part, right? Moral colon what you call, it's better to save, what you call, like to prepare for the future, that kind of thing. You also got that moral, you've got that inserted in the story. You know that it's not part of the story already ends with the grasshopper died. See, so think about that. And this is just a brief end, okay? Now, this is the end of the slide here. So next, before you watch the part 2 of the clip, make sure you read these 2 short stories. The Gift of the Magi by O. Henry. You might feel like threatened by the language a bit because it was written like in the first half of the 20th century, 19 something to 1950s, not earlier than that. But Fish Cheeks is quite more modern, okay? It happens in America, and things that happen in the story, you can relate more to that, okay? So read the stories.